church's one foundation is Jesus Christ her Lord. She is his new creation.
Well, Stephen, we are starting a new course of study, as it were. We'll be starting the minor prophets. My intention, I guess, given all the suggestions that were made at the last time we got together about where we could go from the book of Philippians, I thought maybe we might do a couple of the minor prophets and then go to a New Testament book like perhaps Titus, and then maybe go back to minor prophets again and just sort of mix it up in that particular sense so we don't get too bogged down in any particular area. And so we're going to be starting this evening with the prophet Hosea. Now, by the way, when I was going to Lubbock Christian University, I was one of my Old Testament professors was Dr. Furman Curley. Some of you may know him, some of you may not. He was editor of Gospel Advocate at one particular point in its history. Smart guy, really. Actually, if I recall correctly, I think he got his doctorate from Hebrew Union, which is a Jewish rabbi's college. So he was really tremendous intellect, tremendous scholar. And Brother Curley would always call this book Hosea. And I thought, well, okay, it doesn't exactly have an H in there, but maybe there's something in the Hebrew that I don't see. And then I started, hearing a lot of other people. They kept calling it Hosea. So I thought, well, okay, Dr. Curley is from Alabama. Maybe it was a funky, Alabama sort of an accent. Who knows? But as I was doing the research behind it, by the way, I was taking a look at the Hebrew and noticed that the book, the name Hosea and the king that we call King Hoshea are spelled precisely the same way. So either way is fine. So that helped to resolve a 30-year quandary of mine. So there we are. I'm feeling really fulfilled now. It can be pronounced either way. I think perhaps since I'm used to calling it Hosea at this point, I probably will go ahead and do that. Just giving us a little bit of background to Hosea himself. He prophesied during in the northern kingdom. And we're going to be taking a look at that. Let's take a look at it now. You'll notice, if you're not familiar with the idea that Israel got divided right after Solomon, well, that's in fact what happened. If you were to take a look at Old Testament history, one of the things you'll find out is that right after Solomon died, his son Rehoboam started to take the throne. He ended up having the people come to him and asking for tax relief. Everyone's interested in tax relief, right? And so he initially consults with some of his father's elder counselors. And they all say, your father probably did tax people a little bit hard. My guess is if you cut their taxes, they will love you to death. And so he says, okay, well, I will consider that. And then he decides to go and talk to some of his buds, some of the guys that are about the same age as he was. And they were clearly younger folks and probably full of vim and vinegar and all that other good stuff. And they said, well, no, you need to show these guys who's boss right from the start. I'm paraphrasing, of course. You need to show these guys who's boss. And you need to tell them that my little finger is thicker than my father's thigh. And which is another funky way of saying, if you thought my dad was bad, wahoo, here I come. Well, the northern 10 tribes of Israel did not like that just a whole lot. I was trying to find a nice way of putting it. They objected strenuously to it. And in fact, they said, well, if that's the way you're going to be, see you later, bye. And it just so happened that a fellow who God had already anointed by the name of Jeroboam was in the crowd at the time, and they all said, "Let's go follow Jeroboam. He's our new king." And so they haul off and they separate. And so now there are two different countries, kingdoms, as it were. There's the northern kingdom of Israel. I'm trying to circle that right here. And then there's the southern kingdom of Judah. Sometimes we might get that a little bit mixed up, but you do need to pay attention frequently. Oops. You do need to pay attention to that sort of stuff because it will make a difference. This is supposed to stay up, but it's not. So let's see what I can do to make it stay up. In any case, that'll do for now. We're supposed to get a new one of these before long, so I won't have to worry with it quite so much. In any case, there was then these two kingdoms, and it really is important, especially when you're reading through, like, I don't know, First and Second Kings and so forth. When you're reading an awful lot about these various kings, if you don't pay attention and you just are kind of like blowing through it, and you see this particular king was the king of Israel, and blah, 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 blah. If you don't pay attention to it, you'll think, well, he was the king like David and Solomon were over the entire one big kingdom. Well, that's not the way that it worked. There were actually two kingdoms. So, that being said, in taking a look at Hosea, we will notice that he was a prophet of the northern kingdom. I think it's important for us as we try to understand what Hosea is actually about. It is probably worthwhile then pondering for just a moment some of the history of the northern kingdom. The northern kingdom was its very first king, who had actually been anointed by God to be the king of the northern kingdom. And we may ask, well, God was in favor of this division? And the answer was, well, sort of, yeah, because this was his idea, because Solomon had in fact kind of left God and had gotten into idolatry and a whole lot of other stuff that really wasn't good. And so God said, because you acted that way, I'm going to take away 10 of the 12 tribes away from you. So he did that. He anoints Jeroboam. And he makes to Jeroboam an amazing promise. He makes to him a promise that's very much like the same promise he made to David, which is, if you will obey me and keep my commands and so on and so forth, I will give you a house like David's. And your sons will sit on your throne for, a really long time. Well, this is exactly what every king wants to hear. This is going to be great. But the problem is that Jeroboam didn't trust God about that stuff. And as he took a look at his brand new kingdom, he thought to himself, man, this is like really precarious. What if my brand new citizens decide to go to Passover? And as they're going to Passover, they meet their buddies from Judah. And they say, it's been such a long time since I've seen you. Why in the world would we ever decide to divide and have two different kingdoms? Why don't we just unite again? We can reconcile, make everything okay, and we'll get rid of this Jeroboam interloper, this usurper of power. We'll get rid of him. And that is precisely what it was that Jeroboam was afraid of, because, we live in a democracy, and we're used to, when we get rid of a president, what do? We just let him live his life. Right? If you happen to be a king and you're trying to depose the king, how does the king usually go out? Feet first. You usually get killed. And so Jeroboam was trying to protect himself and his family, because they didn't usually just kill the king, because they figured that his sons would probably try to take the throne too. So if you were trying to get rid of the king, you probably ought to get rid of everybody else too, because otherwise you're going to have some other people that'll be vying for the throne. All that said, for that reason, Jeroboam decided that he would make a few changes to keep people from going to Jerusalem, so they wouldn't buddy up with their old pals from Judah and decide to reconcile and reunite once again. So he decides that he's going to make a few changes. Now, he's not going to make changes with regard to the God who is to be worshipped. When you take a look at that particular section of 1 Kings, he's not changing the worship of God. the Lord, Yahweh. He's not changing that at all. He is simply saying, worshiping an invisible God's pretty hard. So what we're going to start doing is we're going to set up a calf. And that'll be something we can look at. And as we're worshiping the Lord, we can look at that, and that'll sort of be the focus of our worship. Because it is hard to worship something that you can't see, a God that you cannot see. Not only that, but going all the way to Jerusalem is kind of a long way for some folks, especially folks living up in Dan. Why don't we set up a place of worship in Dan, which is way up north, and also in Bethel, which is way south? And that way it'll be a lot more convenient for everybody. And by the way, I've been thinking about this for a while anyhow, and it is kind of exclusive to only have the Levites as being the ones who are the priests. Why don't we broaden this out, and anybody in the entire nation of Israel who wants to become a priest can now be a priest, and that'll be okay. Even more than that, the Feast of Tabernacles and some of those other things that are kind of happening in the fall, they're really kind of inconvenient because there's harvest going on and all that sort of stuff. So why don't we delay it about a month? That'll give everyone an opportunity to get their crops in, and then we can have the Feast of Tabernacles and do all that sort of stuff. That'll be the better way to go. So he makes all those changes. Now, most of these changes, a lot of folks might say, well, that's not so bad. But it is worthwhile noting that Jeroboam becomes famous throughout the rest of the Bible. You see his name over and over again because you see the phrase, the sin of Jeroboam. This king did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam. This king did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam. This king did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam. And the thing about the setting up the calf and so forth, as bad as that was, because of course there's only one place where you really could worship the Lord. That was in Jerusalem. God made that very clear. Only in Jerusalem. But, these were things that Jeroboam thought would be a good idea to change, and so he did. And as a consequence, with regard to the idols and so forth, with the calves, this ended up ultimately making it an easier stretch for Baal worship to start coming in. And we know that God was incredibly displeased with Jeroboam to begin with whenever he did that sort of thing. But we also know, what are some of the famous kings that were kings of Israel, for those of you who are good Bible scholars? What are some of the famous bad guy kings that came out of the north? Ahab, right? Now, it's really interesting. Ahab believed in Yahweh, but he married Jezebel, who was from Sidon, right? And she worshipped Baal, and she worshipped Asherah. And she brought all that stuff in. And people began to embrace these other gods and make them their object of worship. And things just kind of started going down, 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 downhill from there. Not only were they worshiping the wrong gods, in addition to that, their morality began to slip considerably. In part because, with regard to the worship of Baal and Asherah, they were basically fertility gods and goddesses. And in the ancient world, if you were worshiping a fertility god or goddess, that almost always included making a sacrifice of sex. Because the idea is that we are going to show the gods what it is that we want. We want them to, in a metaphorical sort or a godly sort of sense, I guess, we want them to have sex so that the land will be fertile. That was sort of the idea behind it all. And so there became sort of a ritual sex act that would go along with all these things, which ended up ultimately then just dragging so many other morals down as well. Trying to make a long story short, Israel's history, the northern kingdom of Israel's history, just continued to slide, and go down, 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 down. And that is the world into which Hosea is now preaching. The time, very specifically, is roughly about 755 BC to about 710 BC. 710 BC. It is roughly the same time that Isaiah was prophesying. It is during the major king of Jeroboam II, not Jeroboam I, but Jeroboam II, and through Israel's captivity to Assyria, which ends up, by the way, being one of the major focuses of the book of Hosea, because Hosea is saying, because you guys have done all of these things that have offended God so deeply, here's what's going to happen. The local equivalent of the Nazis are going to come in and blow you guys out and take you off into captivity. And when I say the local equivalent of the Nazis, I'm really not that far off. Anyone here ever taken a look at, I may be the only archaeology geek here, I don't know, but take a look at some of the carvings on the king's walls in Assyria, in Nineveh. What do some of them end up including? Oh, tons of beheading. People being skinned alive. He liked to decorate his walls with the skulls of these decapitated people. It was a like a horror walking into a I don't know, a haunted house sort of a thing, like, as you walked into the throne room. And you know why the king of Assyria decided to decorate his walls that way. He wanted to let them know, you mess with me, see what happens? You mess with me, see what happens there? And that'll be you. And you need to just sit down, listen to what I've got to say, and obey me in the story. And anytime that they ever decided to go up against a new kingdom, because largely, it wasn't always this way, but largely the reason that kings went to war with each other, mostly had to do with money. Sometimes it was power, but a lot of times it was basically, we're running out of money. What can we do about that? Oh, I know. We'll go over here and rob this kingdom. And that's what they would do. And they would sell all the animals or use all the animals for their own purposes, take the gold and the silver, take the people and sell them as slaves, and now all of a sudden, our coffers are full. So whenever the king of Assyria decided he was going to go up against somebody else, because his coffers were getting low, he basically came up and said, anybody here seen my walls of my throne room? Are you ready to give up now before we even have a fight? Because if you do, I'll let you live. If you don't, there you go. And this was the very kingdom that God was going to allow to come in and take over Israel. Which kind of leads us to believe, was God angry? Wahoo, was he angry? Indeed he was. Indeed he was. Well, there's a couple of key words I really want us to kind of keep our eyes peeled for. I'll make sure I don't go too far over time here. One of them is the word know or knowledge. Rabbi Abraham Heschel observes that Hosea's prophecy emphasizes relationship, knowing God more than any other prophetic book. In fact, he goes so far as to say, and I believe he's right, because this book is about relationship. So often as you read the book of Hosea, you will see this notion of knowledge, knowing, coming up over and over again. In fact, one of the famous passages out of the book of Hosea is, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Now, we end up usually taking a look at that verse, and how do we normally interpret that particular verse? Up here, right? You don't know this, you're going to get destroyed. That's kind of the way that we interpret it for the most part. Rabbi Heschel has a different take on it, and I believe he's right. He says the same word for know and knowledge that is used in the book of Hosea is exactly the same word that is used when it says, Adam knew Eve, and she conceived. What is that saying? It's talking about an intimate act, right? It's talking about more than just knowing up here. It's talking about relationship knowing, intimate knowing. So now what is that passage potentially saying when it says that my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge? They don't even know me. Oh yeah, we do. We know your name. It's Yahweh. Yeah. And we know some of the stories that, about Moses and stuff. We know that. Yeah. But do you know me? And the answer was a big fat no. They did not. And it ends up being really a very powerful thing when we end up reading through then and find this word knowledge so often in the book of Hosea, that what he's talking about is not simply intellectual knowledge. He's talking about knowledge from here, experiential relationship knowledge. That's what he's talking about. Well, the second word I wanted you to pay attention to is also the word chesed. You're going to say it right. You got to kind of sound like you're trying to clear your throat, But it's the word basically that is oftentimes translated loving kindness, sometimes mercy. But basically it is the word for covenant love. It's sort of an equivalent to the word agape, sort of, except that it also has the added weight of covenant. I'm not going to take a lot of time in talking about covenant. Very important sort of an idea in Scripture that sometimes we just kind of pass off as being, well, a very solemn promise. And certainly it is a very solemn promise. But it's much more than that. It's actually, well, there's two things in particular that we can all identify with when it comes to covenant. One of them is marriage. And the other is adoption, interestingly enough. What is the common thread between marriage and adoption? What was that? You're making family, right? But you're making family out of someone who's not really blood related to you. When you get married, you don't marry someone who's blood related to you, at least not closely anyway. And when you're adopting children, are they your blood children? Well, no. In sociological circles, this is known as fictive family. I guess it comes from the word fiction, I suppose. But it's fictive family. It is making a family where there wasn't one before. And this was a very common thing in the ancient world. Actually, in the Americas, at least among the American natives, there was something known as being a blood brother, wasn't there? What was being a blood brother about?
Well, you each chosen to give yourself to the other in such a way that his best interest or her best interest are your desire.
Yeah. And frequently you would end up sealing it by, slashing your hand or whatever, mingling your blood and saying, now, we are blood brothers. Were they really brothers? Well, no. But it's again this fictive family. It's covenant making. I am making a promise to you that is like family. And here's the deal about the big deal about family and why it is that this kind of a promise is so solemn. There are special obligations that go along with being family, right? You can tell lies to a lot of the world, but you're not really supposed to be lying to your family. You can cheat a lot of the rest of the world, but you really shouldn't be cheating your family. Among some tribes and so forth in less developed parts of the world, they believe don't murder, don't steal, don't lie, and stuff like that. But that basically applies to their tribe. If you're going to kill somebody, it's okay to kill somebody else in the other tribe or lie or cheat or whatever else it might be. Why? Because there's something about family that this tribe is all about that says you don't do that with family. And in the ancient world, if a king wanted to make sure that there was a peace treaty that was really going to hold, you know what he'd do? They even did this in Europe. What would they?
Son or a daughter.
Yeah. So that make a son or daughter marry each other. Now we're family, and now you're not going to double cross me. That was sort of the notion in mind. Well, yeah, it was. In fact, that's exactly what they called it. And frequently it was a very solemn ceremony. You remember whenever Abraham, God made a covenant with Abraham, they took a whole lot of animals and cut them in half. And then the light that was representing God walked through them. And Abraham walked through them. This was not unusual. This was something that was done. And the idea seems to be, we don't know for sure, but it seems to be, if I break this covenant, these dead animals are what I'm going to be. It was like, swearing on my life, as it were. But the whole idea of covenant brings in with it this idea that you don't mess with family relations that way. They are the most sacred, the most solemn of ties. Now, we live in a world that kind of, says marriage, big deal. Yes?
So the idea of covenant or contract or agreement implies that there is a responsibility on both sides.
Yes, it does.
And, we want to hold God responsible, but we don't want to be responsible.
Entirely true. Entirely true. And that's really kind of the deal with regard to Hosea too, by the way. We're going to get more to that, and I need to really get going on that more than anything else. But anyway, there's this idea of loving kindness. You'll end up seeing it a lot in Hosea. And by the way, you'll end up seeing this a lot throughout a lot of the Psalms, by the way. I can't remember which psalm it is, but there's one psalm in which every other line is, the loving kindness of the Lord is everlasting. The steadfast of the Lord is everlasting. It's this word chesed over and over and over again. It is trying to emphasize how God has been watching over you with your best interest in mind all this time.
That term loving kindness is one of the most frequently used terms.
Yes, it is. Very, very frequently used. And it's this word chesed. And so it's just really, it's an important word to pay attention to because it really does become a big deal in the book of Hosea. The outline of the book of Hosea kind of runs along this line. The first few verses and so forth basically are talking about this marriage of Hosea to a woman by the name of Gomer. She is prostitute is not really the right word, but a woman of very low morals, which of course a prostitute would be, but it's not just that she's interested in getting paid all the time. She's just a woman of low morals. And there is an application of that adultery and so forth of Gomer that's found in chapter 2. And in chapter 3, there's this wonderful section which Gomer is restored to Hosea. And it's somewhat beyond our comprehension as to why that would happen that way, but God's just kind of that way. And he's trying to illustrate something really important here. Chapter 4 then talks about the adulterous Israel and the faithful Lord, and trying to draw the parallels of the spiritual adultery of Israel, and that Israel is refusing to repent of her adultery, and therefore God is going to judge them. But with not just with the idea of punishing them, but with the ultimate idea of restoring Israel back to God. With all of those things in mind, let's read the first chapter of the book of Hosea. The word of the Lord which came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, during the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and during the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. When the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, Go take to yourself a wife of harlotry, and have children of harlotry, for the land commits flagrant harlotry, forsaking the Lord. So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. And the Lord said to him, Name him Jezreel, for yet a little while, and I will punish the house of Jehu for the bloodshed of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. On that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. Then she conceived again and gave birth to a daughter. And the Lord said to him, Name her Lo Ruhamah, for I will no longer have compassion on the house of Israel, that I would ever forgive them. But I will have compassion on the house of Judah, and deliver them by the Lord their God, and will not deliver them by bow, sword, battle, horses, or horsemen. When she had weaned Lo Ruhamah, she conceived and gave birth to a son. And the Lord said, Name him Lo Ami, for you are not my people, and I am not your God. Yet the number of the sons of Israel will be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And in the place where it is said to them, You are not my people, it will be said to them, You are the sons of the living God. And the sons of Judah and the sons of Israel will be gathered together, and they will appoint for themselves one leader, and they will go up from the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. Interesting stuff here. I will find a way to get this on. There we are. It starts off, of course, just talking about how it is that this is the word of the Lord which came to Hosea, and he actually gives to us a real timeline to sort of work with. During the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, these were all kings of Judah, and during the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, the king of Israel, right? But the very first thing that God says to Hosea whenever he begins his ministry is an absolutely mind-blowing command. What does he tell him to do? I want you to go marry a woman of harlotry. I want you to marry someone who will sleep with just about anybody. Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's go take yourself a wife of harlotry, and have children of. What does he mean by that? Do I know who the father of the children of harlotry are? But am I supposed to support them? Wow. We're looking at a really weird thing. Now, we may say to ourselves, oh, surely this stuff couldn't really be so. I was reading some commentaries that were kind of dealing with people who were saying that, surely this sort of stuff really couldn't be so, because, of course, if a preacher were to go out and do something like that, why, that'd be the end of his career. But it's important to keep in mind that God gives some of the prophets of Israel some really weird things to do. Go walk around naked for a while. or go build yourself a really weird looking, building that's going to be looking like Jerusalem or something. I mean, there's some really strange things that God has sometimes told his prophets to do. But it's not just because God wants them to look so weird, as much as it is in order to get across an incredibly important point. And that's exactly what's going on here. But can you imagine such a command from the Lord? What can you expect from a spouse who has been already so sexually loose? What can you expect from such a spouse? More of the same. It always blows my mind, doesn't it, you? It always blows my mind that that sometimes women will I guess it goes the other way too, but women will really put pressure on a man who's already married to dump his wife and then to marry her. And I'm thinking to myself, well, if he dumped the first one when he found someone who was a cuter sweetie pie, what do you think is going to happen whenever you get a little bit older and he finds another sweetie pie that's really cute? You know, this is a guy clearly who doesn't know what it means to commit other things. And so whenever it is that you marry someone who already has a track record of doing that sort of thing, what else can you expect except more of the same, right? As a husband, of course, beyond all of that, what might be the question in your mind of any child born to an adulterous woman? Is that child really mine? Is that child really mine? Well, in all of that, Hosea decides to be obedient. Verse 3 says that he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived by someone and bore him a son. And the Lord said to him, name him Jezreel. Why would he be named Jezreel? What does the word Jezreel mean? You know, we have the tendency to name our children because we like the sound of the word. Or perhaps it's the name of some revered relative, or maybe some hero, maybe in the Bible, or something of that nature. Why did people name people in the Bible? Actually, basically in the East, still yet. Those names have meaning. And so also does Jezreel. Anyone know what the word Jezreel means? It can mean one of two things. And yes, one of them is God will scatter. The other is God will sow. Which of those two do you suppose is meant here at this very beginning? God will scatter. God will scatter. Now, just a little bit later on, look at verse 11, in the part of this prophecy where God is talking about how it is that things are going to be reconciled and things are going to be better, it's going to be a brighter day, he says in the very last line there, for great will be the day of Jezreel. What do you suppose he means there? Maybe God sows. Because you see, when you sow, harvests come in. But you can certainly understand, pardon me, you can certainly understand how Jezreel can mean both God scatters and God sows, right? Because how do people sow in the ancient world? Yeah, you get a big handful out of your bag and you scatter it like that. That's what you would do. Well, it can mean both of them. In the first instance, it's probably talking about how it is that God... I am scattering the microphone. I really shouldn't have had such a dramatic gesture, I think. Yeah. I'll see what I can do to rectify that. In any case, so here we're finding God telling Hosea and Israel what is going to happen. God's going to scatter you. How is he going to scatter them? By means of Assyria, right?
Assyria would take all 10 tribes, and they were never restored. And yet, out of the 10 tribes, a lot of conversions, and some Christians, even today in that part of the country, probably date back to
Those times.
the 10 tribes.
Yeah, they were scattered across Mesopotamia. And by the way, just as a matter of sociology, I suppose, why did they scatter them? Basically, it's crowd control. You know, if I conquer a territory, let's just for the sake of illustration here, imagine that China comes and conquers the United States of America. If they decide to leave everybody in place, you see, that's kind of dangerous. Because you see, I've been living next to Joe for a number of years. I know him pretty well. I know where he stands on politics. I know what he thinks. And this guy over here, likewise, I know him pretty well. And all of us on the block, we all speak the same language. And it might be really easy for us to kind of get together and say, hey, you know, I'm tired of that Chinese dictator. Let's see if we can put ourselves together, a militia here, and drive them out. And so it's easy to foment a rebellion. On the other hand, if China decided to scatter us across the face of the globe, well, now my next door neighbor may be from India. The other guy may be from South America. Somebody else across the street may be from Africa. And I don't understand Hindi. I don't understand Spanish all that well, or Portuguese, because I really don't understand that one. And I don't understand Swahili. And I have no idea where these guys are standing in regards to their politics or what they think ought to be done. So what am I likely to do? I'm just going to be quiet, mind my own business, and do my own thing. That's what I'm going to do. This was the rationale, and it worked out pretty well for the most part. Now, but later, Persia decides to come in and decides to undo all of that. Why? Because it wanted to be the good cop and allow everybody to go back to their homes. But at least in Syria, they scattered everybody out. And so that's exactly what had happened. So God is telling Israel that he is going to scatter them. Now another child is born. Verse 6 says she conceives again, gives birth to a daughter. And he says, name her Lo Ruhamah. What does Lo Ruhamah mean? No mercy. The word lo means no. One time when I was in Israel, I had decided to go to the Wailing, to the Western Wall. And it happened to be a Saturday. That was the day off that we had. It was Saturday, and we had gone there. And there's a tradition, maybe you're familiar with it, about writing a little prayer on a piece of paper and going over to the wall and sticking it in the cracks. It's I thought kind of a cool thing. I thought I'd like to be able to do that. So I went through the gate, put a yarmulke on, and got my pen out and started writing my prayer, which was going to be for the redemption of Israel. I thought that'd be kind of a cool thing to put in the Wailing Wall. And as I got through for the redemption, I got a Jewish dude coming at me, and I mean, he was excited. And he was saying, lo, 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 lo. What was he really saying? No. Why? I was writing on Sabbath. Bad thing to do. So I went, oh yeah, I shouldn't do that. So I went and folded my paper up and put it on in a crack and said, God knows what I want to say anyway. So there we are. But the point at least here is that the word lo means no. Ruhamah means compassion or mercy, which is God saying to Hosea what about what's going to happen to Israel? No mercy. What is implied by the connection between Lo Ruhamah's name and whose child she is? Just like with the wife of harlotry, she was not going to be shown, Lo Ruhamah was not going to be shown any compassion or mercy, just like the people of God weren't. What was God unwilling to forgive Israel about? Their idolatry. They're wandering away. This is really more usually said of men, I suppose, than women, but the philandering ways. That's what he's having a hard time forgiving. On the other hand, he was going to save Judah. And by the way, this is really interesting because the scripture tells us that, in fact, in 2 Kings chapter 18, the Assyrians did come up against Jerusalem. And they were going to try to conquer it. And Hezekiah prayed to God. And what happened? How were they rescued? By bow and arrow? By horses and chariots? By grand strategy? It was God. Completely and utterly God. All the way through. Judah and Hezekiah were miraculously saved from Assyria and Sennacherib. Now another son is born. His name is Lo Ami. Lo means no. Ami means My people. By the way, anytime you ever see I on the end of a lot of Hebrew words, it usually means my. That's why it was that Jesus said in Aramaic, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. El is the word for God. E on the end of that, or the I actually on the end of that, means my God. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. So, what was Hosea saying? I'm sorry, what was God saying to Hosea? Your child is not my people. Not my people. And yet, interestingly enough, Israel is going to be like the sand of the seashore. How in the world is that going to work? We've actually been talking about that just a little bit in our Thursday night class. The bringing in of the Gentiles. That's how that's going to work, as a matter of fact. Because in Romans chapter 9, starting in verse 24, among other things, this very passage is quoted. And if you take a look at the context, it's talking about how the Jew and the Gentile are going to be all incorporated into one people. And that's why, and the reason Paul is using that is because it's saying here, in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, were the Gentiles. Not back in those days, not back pre-cross. But in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, it will be said to them, you are my people. As a consequence, he is trying to get across that there is a better day coming. They would end up choosing one leader. That one leader would be Jesus. And now, what's the meaning of Jezreel? God will sow. Well, as we're going to be taking a look at chapter 2 in specific, we're going to see how it is that what the meaning of all this is that Israel had been so philandering, had become so adulterous in their worship and so on and so forth, that God was just equally as wounded as surely Hosea must have been. Imagine the pain, the emotional pain that's caused when a wife runs around on her husband or vice versa. Incredible, profound pain. And that is the very thing that God wanted Israel to understand. Your unfaithfulness has caused me that kind of pain. You know, when I was a kid, a little kid, I didn't have any qualms about hurting my mom and dad's feelings because I just kind of thought, they're mom and dad. They don't have feelings. I do, but they don't. I wonder, do we ever think that about God? I think sometimes we do. An impersonal force. Yes, sir.
You know, we got from the juvenile detention center, a young man that, as he turned age 13, we got him on his 13th birthday. Not too long after we brought him home, Bonnie heard him discussing the situation with my son John. And he wanted to do something that was against the rules. And he asked John, what do you think Dad would do if we did thus and such? And my son John said, Eric, it's not what God would, or Dad would do to us, but what we would do to Dad.
Mm-hmm.
And Bonnie overheard that. When she told me that, I thanked God and said, we're doing something right.
Yeah, indeed. Great illustration. And we need to kind of apply that to our relationship with God. Our sins are not just harmless little things that don't really hurt God one way or the other. They wound him. They wound him. And thinking about your life and thinking about the direction you're going with your life, if perhaps you can see that maybe the things that you've done are wounding God, today is the day to turn around. Don't hurt him anymore. We've got a God who loves us so profoundly. He sent his only begotten Son to die on the cross for us so we can be sinless. This evening, then, if you need to respond to God's generous call, we encourage you to come forward while we stand and sing.
The church's one foundation is Jesus Christ her Lord. She